is Global Order. I'm Hindol Sengupta. I'm delighted today to have a new guest. Her name is Dr. Pooja Bhatt. The reason Dr. Pooja Bhatt was invited to have this conversation was, and I'm going to read out a tweet that I saw from her, uh, the sidelines of the Shangri La Dialogue. She said a bit late to this, but Chinese Defense Minister General Li Shangfu's speech at the Shangri La Dialogue, surreal. Every single utopian line can be countered with facts and truths. The same sermon can be plastered back on PRC leadership's face. Dr. Bhatt, welcome.
Thank you. That's correct.
So let's begin from there, if we may. Why don't you begin by telling us what you saw as, a sermon from the comments of the general, and how each point can be refuted in the things that he said.
All right. So thank you, Hindol, for having me for this conversation. And I'm quite glad that that tweet intrigued you for this interview. So I'm glad to be here talking about why I said and what I said. And to start with, I'll provide a little context about General Li Shangfu's, current position and what he said, why he said. So he took over. He was a journal in PLA, basically, and after his retirement, he became the Minister of Defense within the government of China. The Shangri-La Dialogue. He became the leader or the minister in March this year, and the Shangri-La Dialogue 2023 was his first major international conference where he spoke as a keynote speaker, one of the keynote speakers. A itinerary was dedicated to him. Also, he is one of the guys who was sanctioned from the US in 2018 for buying Russian weapons, right? So he cannot visit US, he cannot meet those people. In fact, he cannot even invite the leaders the US Secretary Defense and all these people to talk to him directly, because the kind of sanction disallows him to do that. So in this context, where he is not invited for a talk and where he cannot invite anyone over a talk, so the current context in which he gave the speech makes a lot of sense. So if you would see just before him, when UN DefSec Lloyd Austin spoke, he said, we do not want a major confrontation with the US, and we are ready to, with the China, and we are ready to have a conversation with it. However, the next day when General Li Shangfu speaks, he never mentions about having a conversation. The way he speaks about that, China does not want a conversation at all. He never makes even a single statement about having a conversation with the US. So it's all of a sudden, entire thing becomes one-sided, and you can understand why he cannot have a talk, because for having a talk, either he would have to invite someone from the US to talk, either he has to go to the US. So in that context, I'm just trying to figure out in his entire speech that he gives in Shangri-La last week. So he gave entire, half an hour, 40-minute speech where he makes a lot of points. I think his was one of the longest speeches in the entire 7 plenaries that were there. And he starts with, talking about giving a lot of focus on China's new, what he calls as Global Security Initiative, GSI. From a China watcher, anyone who's watching Chinese, at least foreign defense policies, would know that this is nothing new. And there is nothing new in the entire talk at all. If you go back and read it again, it makes so much of sense that there is not even a single new idea or new initiative in the entire talk. It's all the same things repeated again. So starting from Global Security Initiative, which was kind of started by President Xi earlier this year. It's again, it's not a new initiative. It's a repackaging of its old initiative of 2002, which is called New Security Initiatives, and where it talks about how China wants to get into collaborative, cooperative security with other countries and have mutual respect for each other, and they want to have more conversation with other countries and those kind of rule of law. So it's just the same dialogues have been just repeated for the Global Security Initiative, and that becomes New Security Initiative to Global Initiative in the current order. Basically, entire speech of General Li Shangfu was selling out the global security initiative. So what he talks about, so if you want, allow me a few more minutes, I would just go
Please,
for point by
please,
point.
point by point. Yes,
Hmm,
indeed. We would like to hear your point by point rebuttal. And
hmm,
the reason why we want to hear your point by point rebuttal is this, that this kind of duplicitousness has been displayed by Chinese authorities around the world, but especially with regard to India again and again and again. And the new ploy of the Chinese seem to be that they want to depict to the world that they really are fighting for peace and they want to push the agenda for peace. It is India which is blocking it. So it's very important for us to hear your point by point rebuttal. Please go ahead.
all right. So he starts by going. So I've already said about GSIA and how it's this repackaging of the old story. He starts by going. He is saying that the countries should have mutual respect for each other, prevail, and it should not over bullying and hegemony of each other. And exactly that's the point we are seeing in our northern borders. We are seeing bullying. We are seeing hegemonic interest of China and their aspirations in our northeastern border. Not only there, we are seeing the same thing in South China Sea. They are bullying the smaller countries like Vietnam and Philippines into, the fishermen are being bullied over by PLA Navy and their maritime militia. So what bullying are they talking about? They're themselves the bully in the region. Then they talk about that countries should not interfere in each other's internal affairs. And so again, we see the same thing. China has been interfering in every other country's internal affairs. However, it is going by impacting the political leadership, the left-leaning political leadership all over the world, rather than the public at large, which is more of a US kind of way of doing things, more democratic model of influencing. Then it also talks about that countries should not resort to unilateral measures, and sanctions. But China has by itself using a lot of unilateral measures, mostly forceful. It also talks about that countries should not use forceful measures, and China is the one country who's using forceful measure anywhere, whether it's land, whether it's maritime. Every single day, we are even on the news channels, on the newspapers, we've been seeing incidents as recent as during the Shangri La Dialogue, just before Li Shangfu speak. We have U.S. Warship being, cut by at a very short distance by a Chinese warship. So it's again a very unilateral, forceful way of doing things. And what was U.S. warship doing? It was doing a joint freedom of navigation operation in the Taiwan Strait, which China sees as its own region, basically. Again, then we talk about China talks about that they support ASEAN centrality and strategic autonomy. If that is the kind of support they have, then why is not the code of conduct on the South China Sea has not come about yet? If ASEAN was given so much of liberty, the South China Sea issue would have been resolved both bilaterally and multilaterally. But China has, in every way, blocked this code of conduct. Basically, code of conduct was used to resolve the entire South China Sea. But since 2002, and it's been over 15, 16 years now, we haven't seen anything on the code of conduct. So, what ASEAN centrality is China talking about? Then he goes on speaking about how international law should be observed, how rules of order should be observed. And again, when we see all these events happening, we do not see international law being upheld anywhere. China itself, being an UNCLOS signatory, did not become a party to the PCA verdict, which is Covenant Court of Arbitration verdict, against Philippines in 2013-14 when the case was going on. And all of a sudden, when 2016 the arbitration came up, it said we do not agree with the arbitration because we don't consider UNCLOS as a UN body, and which is, if it's not a body, we are not a member. We are member of sorry, we don't consider PCA as a body. We consider UNCLOS as a body. So if UNCLOS has made PCA for arbitration of disputes, it has the equal rights over the arbitration. So how can China be a member of UNCLOS but not agree to the arbitration body? So where does the international law upholding goes? Another issue then they talk about that they want to resolve, they did resolve was the Middle East crisis and Ukraine crisis and Korean Peninsula, all these crises. China has shown its, forwardness in resolving the international crisis. But little do we know that how transparent these, talks were. We don't know how the entire Middle East crisis was resolved in Saudi, Iran, and all these countries. What went behind the, doors? Normally, we do not get to know. But here in this case, something got resolved all of a sudden, which US was trying for ages to do. What happened all of a sudden? So the kind of transparency and mutual trust China has been talking, there has been not been any in this case in terms of resolution of disputes. Then he talks about block confrontation, that we should avoid block confrontation with openness and inclusiveness, that countries should not become party to one block and another. But the very starting, when he started the speech, he said that countries should stand on the right side of history. These are the words General Li Shangfu spoke. So if he is saying that countries should pick up the right side of history, he is himself inviting, a block formation, that you support us, you do not support countries who are seeking hegemony and, one-sided, power struggle in the region. So I think everything adds up that whatever he's saying, that they are doing just the opposite. Lastly, I would want to mention towards another thing that very interestingly they said was about modernization, that how Chinese own modernization is in the favor of the larger world. So basically, he's repackaging his entire, peaceful rise and peaceful growth in the packaging of modernization. He goes on saying that, BRI is one of those major provider of public goods, and this has been very well received as a platform of cooperation. And it is in world's interest that China modernizes so that, people in the BRI will be positively affected. But now we see where the BRI is going. Half of the countries are bankrupt, so they have sovereign debt issues. Other half countries do not have the projects going on; they are hung. So BRI is not well received. There are a lot of countries who have pulled out also, especially European countries. So I don't know where, in what utopian world he is talking about all this. Then he also tries to basically whitewash the entire his military growth. Basically, he's saying that all these PLN military growth that we have, these forces go for peacekeeping operations and trying to establish world peace. But I don't know, means US UN peacekeeping does have the largest funding coming from China, but what is not seen is those peacekeeping operations, they're also having some kind of involvement from China in terms of what what processes to follow, which countries to go, those kind of internal interference. So with money, China is also trying to interfere this peacekeeping operation. So we can see where it is going. Then China is talking about improving its, so how China's modernization will improve the global governance. Here again, for me, it's a red signal, because it's no like it's not a problem that a country which is rising wants to participate in global governance. Every country does, including India. We want to part of every major multilateral organization. But being a member to a multilateral organization and impacting its processes, membership methods is an altogether different thing. And I can say this with very certainty because I have a PhD on this single thing. I can say that how China has gone about impacting the methods and processes of each of their multilateral organizations it has joined in few years, like last few years. So I do not know if it's improving global governance or not, because it is trying to bring those Chinese characteristics in every kind of processes that it wants to involve. Um, then it talks about uh, um, code of conduct that China is trying to develop having consultations on code of conduct on the South China Sea, and how it wants to improve the code of unplanned encounters at sea. So the Q, the Code of Unplanned Encounters at Sea, basically was introduced last year. So it was during the same Shangri La Dialogue, that whenever China and US would have those unsafe passes in the South China Sea and the waters nearby, they will inform each other and they'll have some kind of communication. But till now, it has not been efficient, and it has been said by Singaporean minister at the same platform at Shangri La Dialogue this year. He agreed to the fact that Qs has not been successful. So where does China talk about that? China is doing consulting and they are going ahead with such kind of code of conduct. It's not going anywhere. Lastly, I would want to talk about um, the new major country relationship that the China was talking, that it wants a new country relationship with the US, and any kind of it's a statement that you must have noticed, that any kind of US China confrontation will lead to would be destabilizing for the rest of the world. The entire statement is problematic. It is just showing that the only two countries which are there in the world are US and China. It simply disregards rest of the other countries. So that again, you are coming to a platform where ASEAN. You say ASEAN is central, where a lot of other countries, including Australia and European and Canada, all these countries are coming. All of a sudden, your entire focus of the conversation and the talk goes to US China war, and how rest of the world will be getting affected, as if they are not involved in the entire conversation. So that kind of one-sidedness of the entire conversation was a little problematic for me. I think I went pretty much long. Yeah,
Oh,
I think I.
fantastic. You actually really did the right thing by taking every point and giving a suitable rebuttal to each of them. Thank you very much. In conclusion, let me discuss a little bit about what you mentioned, that this is your area of expertise. You know, since independence, indeed, since the first war that India fought against China, in diplomatic terms, India has seen Chinese duplicitousness again and again. You know, Nehru saw the same thing, and in fact, some would say sometimes fell prey to that. Many other governments after him have consistently seen this Chinese duplicitousness. Tell us a little bit about how you see this. How much can one, really take the Chinese at face value? What do we do about this duplicitousness? Because, any engagement really is impossible because one can nearly never trust what the Chinese are really saying.
I totally agree with what you just said, and that's the entire problem. I think the Chinese are very aware that it's not the economic power or the military power that rest of the world might be scared of. I think it is more of a Chinese factor of not being no, we can't trust China. That kind of image that is it has made for himself, that it's not predictable anymore. It was never a predictable country. So I think it plays on that strength of not being predictable. The international relations work on the predictability of state actors, and that's how you make your policies and processes and foreign policies basically. But when a country is so unpredictable that it will say that it will come to a talk today, tomorrow, and then go on a talk and then say this is our stand, you agree to our stand, or the talk is off. You can't go on with that kind of attitude. When you have a talk, there is a implicit understanding that you will put your point, other party will put their point, and then you'll negotiate. There's never that kind of thing with China in any of the conversation. For China, it's correct that a lot of China scholars have repeatedly said that China negotiates from a power of strength. It's not, you are never an equal party to China when you're sitting on a table for negotiation, except for the US. For every other country, negotiation is not possible because China will say that these are my viewpoints. Either you agree to this or we cannot take it further. How would you, negotiate with such a country? So I think that's correct. That it's not easy to negotiate and work with a country like China, and I think it deliberately does so.
Fascinating. This understanding of how China negotiates, of course, is vital not only for India's diplomatic corps, but also perhaps for Indians who are interested in the news, who are interested in, where their countries stand in the world. Should be a broader understanding of these Chinese positions, which would enable perhaps even sort of common people understand where we stand vis-a-vis China and what we need to do. Do you agree with that?
Yes, you're absolutely correct. You actually summed the entire thing up. It's not easy for any whether China watcher or a China specialist. It's not easy to predict the country, and I think we need to live in that predictability. I think the MEA as well as the PMO and the leadership in India is very well settled into this fact that we have two are very unpredictable neighbors, and they work. The entire strength that they have is unpredictability, and this is the situation we are living. So all our policies have to be uh, to be made keeping that fact in mind. So I think the recent border talks that happened, EAM also said and other leaders also said, military leadership, that till the time border situation does not become normal, we cannot continue the conversation. For China, in fact, they see the current position is normal. So you can see the kind of difference, the kind of interpretation of normalcy that we talk about. So you're correct. It means it's not easy to negotiate with China that in that manner.
Dr. Pooja Bhatt, thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate you spending time with me to explain really very patiently, point by point, demolishing the arguments made by the Chinese general at the Shangri La Dialogue. Really appreciate your time for doing this. Thanks very much.
Thank you for having me. I really liked speaking to you. Thank you.
Thank you.